Hello and welcome to the conclusion of the Developing Microsoft Azure Solutions 7532 Exam Learning Path by Cloud Academy. In this lecture, we'll wrap up the learning path with some tips on the exam itself, as well as links to further resources and any other tips. Let's start by talking a little about the 7532 exam itself. What can you expect? Note that our advice here is given based on the exams at the current time and may be subject to change. But firstly, be prepared for a long exam. You're given a maximum of 2 hours to go through the 65 questions, and you'll need it. The questions themselves are roughly evenly split into two sections. Firstly, you'll see standalone questions on a specific area. The second type are case studies, which are more involved. This will involve a scenario with an introduction, some technical details, and finally a series of interviews with a team of stakeholders such as project managers, team lead, and head of marketing. You'll then be given a series of questions on the scenario, and note, once you've answered all of the questions for the case study, you will not be able to go back and review your answers. Questions themselves will take on a variety of formats. First are the multiple choice questions. These themselves vary from selecting a single correct answer to selecting multiple correct answers. For example, 3 from 6, or simply select all that apply. Secondly are the drag and drop questions. These include grouping tiles into specific categories to picking steps in the correct order to achieve a task. For example, achieving a slot swap for a web application. And lastly, you can expect to be exposed to code fragments in this exam. The simplest case is of picking the correct code fragment to achieve a specific task, but it can be more involved. For example, you may be asked to order a number of code fragments in the correct order to solve a problem. Here's a set of tips to remember for the different areas of the exam. As mentioned, expect code examples in the exam. They focus on C#, so a good overview of the main high-level classes and patterns is essential. Familiarity with the PowerShell commandlets is required. This is particularly important in the VM space, but ensure that you don't neglect other areas, for example, setting up a load balancer endpoint. Know your networking. This covers areas such as virtual IPs versus public IPs, as well as static versus dynamic IP4 gateways. Virtual networking configuration is another popular area. And when it comes to storage, make sure you're aware of the different types of storage assets, such as page and block blobs, and when each should be used. Common SQL questions often include knowledge of the limits of each SQL tier, for example, the maximum database size for an S1 database, as are questions on geo-replication. Make sure you know the different types of diagnostics available for each service, and don't neglect ETW login. Security of storage assets make popular questions, so make sure you understand SAS tokens, blob security in general, as well as CORS. Do expect questions on how to scale the different services, as well as auto-scaling if offered. There are generally two good web-based resources for learning more about Azure. Firstly, the Azure homepage has a wealth of documentation, videos and step-by-step labs for you to experiment with new services, so it's well worth taking a look. It doesn't contain guided tutorials toward the exam though, so make sure you use it in conjunction with the course content. Secondly, the MSDN forums are a great way to raise questions with other Azure users, as well as get support and advice from the Microsoft development teams themselves. These are forums on the site for most of the Azure services, so it's well worth checking it out. Lastly, we hope that you found this learning path both interesting and useful, and would like to wish you the best of luck when taking the exam.